Hello and welcome to the Home Assistant Podcast. This is episode 2022.7. My name is Rohan Karamandi, and as usual, I've got my good friend, Phil Hawthorne. Hey, Phil.
Hey, Rohan, how's it going?
Good, how are you?
This episode is sponsored by Home Assistant Cloud by Nabu Casa. Easily access your local Home Assistant instance remotely for a small monthly fee that supports the Home Assistant and ESP Home projects. Configuration is done by the user interface, so there's no fiddling with router settings, SSL certificates, or any YAML.
All right, let's just jump into it. So Home Assistant had the Let's Get Loud event. Not sure how many people got a chance to catch that. I believe there was a couple of things that came out related to that as well. But it's pretty cool. So essentially it's around bringing a lot more music or audio focus to Home Assistant. Including things like ESP Home's support with audio devices, and it's on YouTube. Check it out. It's about an hour and 16 minutes according to the YouTube channel. But essentially, yeah, they talk about quite a few things. So they talk about Home Assistant, ESP Home, Raspberry Audio or Raspy Audio, or however you want to call it, and Music Assistant. So it's actually pretty neat, where you can now leverage Home Assistant in a little different way to start playing music and move to different devices and things like that. And the reason it wasn't part of your normal average Home Assistant launch is it's actually tied in with the ESP Home release, right? So it was actually brought in alongside that. So Jesse from ESP Home, Paulus, Olivier from Raspy Audio, as well as Marcel Velt, who built the Music Assistant tool, did a
live stream?
live stream, exactly, yeah, on what it's about and stuff like that. It is actually really, really cool. So essentially, like, you can use Music Assistant to kind of bring in a lot of the different sources that you leverage, and then start playing it in different devices or different groups, up to and including ESP Home devices that now support audio. So, for example, Olivier from Raspberry Audio was talking about a lot of that kind of stuff as well. To say, hey, we can. They've got this hardware that can plug in, and you can flash whatever you want on it and use that, right? There's even like ESP Home based speakers that they talk about and stuff like that, which are pretty cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So it's actually pretty neat. So if you didn't get the chance, check it out, and it's a pretty neat event. We'll leave the URL in the show notes, and check that out.
I would love to see, because I know Home Assistant have like the Home Assistant Yellow, they've had Home Assistant Blue. I'd love to see them doing something like an ESP Home hardware speaker that could be, purchased. And bonus points if they can make it as a competitor to Sonos. Like, that would be really cool, right?
So Raspberry Audio does have that, right? I think they were selling that, if I'm not mistaken. So, which is again, it's I don't think it's supposed to be like Sonos level quality, because
Of course,
I mean,
yeah.
they're fairly inexpensive for what they are. I don't have one to play with, so that's not a review by any means. I just assume for that price point, it's not meant to be the premium speaker experience that you would get,
Yeah,
right?
of
So
course.
yeah, so I think that's kind of where that is. But it was a pretty neat event all in all. There was quite a bit of talk around music and audio with that. They did some demos, they did some live demos, which is pretty cool. Yeah, so I don't know. I think check it out if you get the chance, and we'll post a link in the show notes.
Yeah, definitely. All right. As I said, would love to see Home Assistant, Nabu Casa bring on and go ahead against, IKEA and Sonos and Apple, everyone, to create like a DIY friendly all-in-one speaker. That would be really cool.
Yeah.
All right, 2022.7 is here. And I don't know if you've had a chance to check out the beta yet, Rohan, but the performance on this thing is insane. So, and usually we get this in every release, right? Performance improves, database improvements, blah, blah, blah. This one's actually a pretty substantial one. So there's a couple of reasons for that. But the big performance increase comes, they've redone a whole bunch of their JSON and YAML library that's being underpinned in Home Assistant. even if you've long gone from YAML, a lot of the Home Assistant configuration uses JSON underneath. So by them, doing some major work on these libraries, they've been able to get, basically that touches everything in Home Assistant is now so much more faster, snappier. I usually use the reload, configuration buttons all the time. Once I've edited my configuration in YAML, those things are really fast now. Generally, I could, hit the reload automations button, go over to the automations, watch them, one by one get, removed, and then come back one by one. Now, before I come back to the automation screen, like they're already reloaded. So really impressed with that.
Yeah, that's pretty. It's actually pretty snappy too. I've noticed that. Like again, I haven't done a ton of stuff since I updated it. I a lot of times I just kind of update it and be like, all right, I got something else to do, and then go do that, right? But it's actually pretty neat how I still love the focus on performance, right? And in my opinion, especially when we compare it to where it was before, Home Assistant is extremely performant, right? Like it is very good, but there's still a focus on let's make it better. So I am a huge fan of that. So that's I don't know. I just think it's really cool work.
Yeah, and so also a part of the upgrade is Python being upgraded to version 3.10.
Yeah.
As of this release. So if you're using the Home Assistant OS or a container installation of Home Assistant, then there's nothing you need to worry about. Otherwise, if you're running your own version of Python and manually running Home Assistant, and you would like to take some use the latest version of Python, it's available now for 3.10.
Yeah. All right. You can also now update firmware for Zwave devices or Z-Wave, depending on where in the world you're from within Home Assistant. So you can essentially upload the updated firmware files in there into Home Assistant, and then Z-Wave.js or Z-Wave.js can push it out for you directly from the Home Assistant UI, which is nice.
This is interesting. So I don't know if you saw the whole Jasco GE debacle that happened with Linus Tech Tips around.
No, I didn't.
Oh, okay. So I watched the video yesterday. Basically, Linus is going through his whole smart home, right? He's using Home Assistant around his house, and he bought he claims $10,000 worth of these GE Jasco Z-Wave switches in the US, like dimmer switches. The problem is they have motion sensors on the switches, and he couldn't disable the motion sensor, right? To the point where he would turn off a switch and walk away from the switch, but him walking away would activate the motion sensor and the light would turn back on.
Right.
And so, there's a configuration key in most Z-Wave devices that you can, customize things around with. He just wanted to change that. He couldn't. And he reached out to their support team and they said, hey, no, we don't give out firmware. You have to go through your hub, which is, in this case, Smart Things or the Fabaro, wherever your hub is.
Yeah.
We don't give out the firmware to the public. And he was like, well, my hub is Home Assistant. Like I have a Z-Wave stick, right? Just give me the firmware to upload. No, we won't do that. Anyway, the TLDR of that is he was able to fight with GE, Jasco, and get them to release the firmware publicly. And as part of that release, they've also given instructions on how to update that firmware with Home Assistant. It does suck that it did have to, it was Linus that had to do this. Like if it was you or me, Rohan, or anyone else, right? Because there's a whole thread on the Home Assistant forums about these switches.
Yep.
And for years, people weren't able to get any resolution from it. And it took, a big YouTube personality to get this company to move, which kind of sucks.
Yeah. And I'm not a fan of like public shaming, whatever, right? Like where it's you shame a company into doing something.
Yep.
As much as, I mean, we go on our rants, but that is literally just us being like, hey, this thing annoyed me or whatever. The intent of that is not, hopefully make some change, but I don't think Phil Hawthorne and Rohan Karamandi are quite that label yet where we can actually have influence on manufacturers doing things, right? But I'm glad it got resolved, but it is unfortunate that that's what it came down to. Right?
Exactly. So but at least now there's the ability within Home Assistant to just flick off your update file and away it goes, which has been a feature that's been in Z-Wave.js for a few releases that I've been using it for. It was, so I guess they're just exposing an API endpoint from there where they go,
which is cool.
Very cool. All right. Gauge cards now have labels. So if you're using a gauge card on the front end, and you've got certain range that you want to be able to give a label, like maybe this is a normal range, this is a high range, low range, you can actually now have them displayed within the front end of Home Assistant.
Nice. Also, history's gotten a little more love this time around too. You can filter the history using what's called a target selector. So essentially, you can just say, "Hey, what do I want to look at?" and bam.
All right. Something that I have found a bit confusing through my use of Home Assistant throughout the years is being able to change the weather units to your preferences. So I don't know, like depending on what weather integration I would install, like the wind
Yeah.
speed would be, like meters per second, maybe it's miles per second. It's just M/S, whatever it is. Whereas, I would generally have my wind reported as kilometers per hour.
Yeah.
So as part of this release, Home Assistant have made a big change to all the weather components in Home Assistant, and you can now go in and select. I believe by default it will try and match if you're using metric or imperial in your Home Assistant config.
Yeah.
But you should be able to also go in and customize. If you prefer, wind in this sort of, scale, then you can use that.
Yeah, which is nice for again, like Canada as an example is
Yep.
primarily metric, but we use imperial for some things.
Yeah, exactly right.
Which
I think
is
the UK might be the same. So
yeah, like it's really weird. So, but so it's nice that it's not like pure this or pure that, right? So, like for example, like my driver's license has my height in centimeters, but I don't think I've ever described my height in centimeters to anybody, right? And it's like you all use the inches and feet, right? It is weird. So I don't know, it's one of those weird things. All right, moving forward, you can easily now convert values to Booleans in templates. So before you needed a bit of magic behind the scenes to, go in and change it to, hey, this is actually a Boolean, whatever. But now you can just kind of say, hey, here it is. Boom.
What I really like about this is they've also gone that little bit extra and supported like the Home Assistant version of Booleans as well.
Yeah.
So if you have if you're checking the state of on or off in Home Assistant land, that means true or false. So yeah, they've got support for that as well. So that was a nice little touch as well, I thought.
Yeah, that is pretty cool.
If you're a user of Sonos and you have surround sound, they can now tweak the surround sound settings per channel in Home Assistant. So, if you prefer TV to have a certain level for surround sound and movies have a different level, then you can do that with an automation now. Pretty cool.
Nice. And kind of same theme related, Jellyfin, if you're a user of Jellyfin, now supports movie collections in Home Assistant, which is nice.
All right. The area card can now show flood alerts, humidity, and an icon for temperature. So yeah, bit of love to the area card as well. Rohan, have you used the area card at all in your installation?
No, I haven't.
No, I always thought like I like the idea of the area card, just not having the ability to customize it completely the way I would. I don't necessarily need every room to have light level or whatever is in there, right? To me, I prefer to have like a picture entity card that I can then customize and have the exact entities I want on it. But
what parts you want,
yeah, I don't know. I do like the idea of the entity card though, like the area card, I should say.
Yeah,
makes sense.
Yeah, which is I don't know. I think it's pretty cool. All right, what else? So one last really cool thing is, I guess it's not really cool. I just like the debug feature. So to me, it's really cool. Is the ability to pause the logbook stream when you're scrolling. So a couple of releases ago, we brought in the whole piece where logbook is now live. You can start, seeing events real time. I push a button and bam, here it is in the logbook without having to refresh or anything like that. But that also brought in the challenge of if you have something that's updating so often, you're kind of sitting there trying to figure out the scroll and stop scrolling down, stop scrolling up, whatever it is. And then, so now there's a pause to that where you can just kind of pause it and say, okay, let me actually sit and read through all of this so I can figure out what's going on.
Yeah, it's like, so the other night I was trying to debug something, and I was like in the logbook trying to follow the timeline, and I didn't realize, I think by default it chooses like the last 3 hours up to the next hour or something like that.
Yeah.
So anyway, as I'm scrolling down the list, I'm like, hang on, I've already read this, and like entities were happening in real time, right? So my list was slowly going down the page, and I thought, oh, this is so frustrating. So I had to change the time back to exactly when I knew my issue had happened. So yeah, this is that's smart, right? As soon as you scroll down the page a little bit in your logbook, the live scrolling will stop. So I think that's really cool.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Like, again, the other thing you can do is just scope the time to when you want it to stop or whatever, right? And it'll stop at that point. But yeah, again, it's.
But when you're at like 11:29 p.m. that you need it to stop scrolling at, right? Like,
yeah, a lot of times it's it's just a little easier to do it with the pause button. So I'm a huge fan of that.
Well, now you don't even need a pause button. As soon as it detects your mouse is scrolling down the list,
and
it stops.
It'll do it.
Yeah. No new integrations in this release. That's
nice.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Usually we get some random cryptocurrency or geocaching or something.
Yeah.
But no integrations this release. So
that's okay.
Yeah.
Let's talk about some breaking changes then.
Yeah. So we mentioned before Python 3.10. So if you're using a custom component that doesn't support Python 3.10, you may need to roll back to a previous version until that custom component is upgraded. So unfortunately, there are so many custom components. Some may be in hacks, some may not be in hacks. Home Assistant Community Store. There's just no way to know what's going to break, what's maintained. I guess that's the cost of running a custom component, unfortunately. But do watch out. So if you're running your own custom Python version, if you're still running Python 3.9, you can upgrade to this release. That's fine. But if you are running, Home Assistant OS or Home Assistant in a Docker container, they ship with Python 3.10 out the box. There's I don't think there's a 3.9 version available. And I guess it'll probably go on to the next point. Why don't you tell us about Bluetooth? What's happening there?
Yeah, so BluePy, which is a Bluetooth Python library, so that's basically behind the scenes in a lot of different Home Assistant integrations, is not compatible with 3.10. So if you do that, then there might be some stuff that's broken. So for example, the BWE Smart Clim BLE sensor, the Elgato Avia, the EQ3 Smart thermostats, the Leviton Decora switches, the MiFlora flower sensors or plant sensors, and Zenge. So these are some of the ones that we know that use BluePy in the background. So
and by the time this release comes out, there could be more, I'm guessing too, right? Once they've gone through the code and seen, this one's affected.
Yeah. So hopefully there's an update to the BluePy libraries pretty soon. But if not, I know especially the MiFlora is a pretty big one. Those are the Xiaomi plant sensors that you get. Those are BLE driven. But a lot of times people do run those directly through like a ESP32 or something like that, which just through Bluetooth that way. So that may potentially work around it. Maybe, I don't know.
So this becomes the problem that I have, and this is sort of my pain point with this release. It's this is a doozy of a breaking change. So you mentioned BluePy. Hopefully it'll get an update soon.
Yeah,
that library has not been updated in quite some time.
Yeah,
and I don't think it's ever going to be updated. Home Assistant have put a shout out in the release notes to say, hey, we know that these integrations are no longer compatible with 3.10. We recommend that you use this Bluetooth library for Python if you can go in and upgrade it.
Yeah.
To me, like moving Home Assistant and all the Docker containers and Home Assistant OS to 3.10, knowing that at least these integrations are not going to be working, I'd love to see the Home Assistant community offer a 3.9 variant for the time being, perhaps. I don't know if, what the reasoning behind not doing so is, or maybe someone could create a 3.9 temporary container just to support these for the time being. But
yeah, it's again, yeah, it's last seen as updated in December 2018, right? So it's
That's not coming back. Right.
yeah.
That's a very popular Bluetooth Python library. So it's a shame to see it, go away like that.
Yeah. So the other platform is Bleak, right? So the other library is Bleak that is updated, I believe. So for as long as that's the case, then I think the suggestion is, hey, can we move to Bleak to all the people maintaining these those broken libraries that we mentioned, the broken plugins that we mentioned, right? Yeah, like I'm just looking at Bleak. There was something done last month yesterday, as of July 1st, as of the time of this recording, right? We're recording on the 2nd. So yeah, so yesterday was the last update that was done. So again, it is very obviously still maintained. So which is cool. So if you are one of the release owners or not the release owners, if you are one of the owners of some of those integrations, then maybe that's something that we look into.
Or if you're a Python developer and you think you can go in and change the Bluetooth library yourself, pull requests always accepted.
Yeah,
it's a big, like, I'm just seeing, there's 6 integrations here that are no longer compatible with the latest version of.
Yeah, and a couple of
Home
them are
Assistant.
major too, right? So that's the key there.
I mean, my Flora, like, that sticks
That's
out to me as a.
Yeah.
But then again, Home Assistant does have the statistics now, so they probably know. All right, maybe. Let's look it up. Actually, can we find that out?
Maybe, yeah.
Maybe we should answer our own question here. Like, why have these been considered not a major? Well, there you go. So I said my Flora just then. 0.7% of installations reporting statistics via Home Assistant Analytics are using my Flora. So
yeah, because a lot of folks, like I said, do run it through like some kind of abstraction, right? Like ESP Home or something like that, and then dump it into MQTT for auto discovery, things like that. So I think most of the guys are focused on something like that. So again, that's a good alternative too, right? Is you, as much as it sucks, you spend a couple of bucks to get a ESP get an ESP32.
Yep.
Load ESP Home onto there with the MyFlora app, right? And there's, or not app, but script, and there's a ton of guides out there for it. So,
and I've just checked all those integrations. All of them have less than 1% usage. So I guess maybe
it's not a big deal.
Not a big deal, but for those 1% of people out there, stuck until those integrations can get on a great path.
Yeah, agreed.
All right, Google Calendars has a breaking change. So the scan for calendar service has been removed and should be replaced with a service call to the reload config entry. Makes sense. Keep that standard. Also, the add event service has been deprecated and should be replaced with a new service called create event, which now takes a Google Calendar entity ID instead of the Google Calendar ID, which I think makes a lot more sense, since you have the entity ID available within Home Assistant as opposed to that awful ID that Google Calendars have.
Yeah. Alongside Google, Nest has a breaking change, and essentially the authentication method that they use, which is called, like, there's a few names for it: desktop, installed app, or OOB, which typically stands for out of the box. That type of authentication has been deprecated by Google and will be breaking in October. Right, so you got a little bit of time, but as a result, basically, Home Assistant has gone ahead and upgraded the Nest integration to be a little more streamlined, so that they can actually go in and not have it break ahead of time. So the OAuth application credentials for the Nest integrations will be moved to the UI, and you can use it. I believe you should be able to use the OAuth, the new OAuth application credential page to build those in as well. So if you're already using WebAuth, your existing Nest app credentials in YAML will be brought in automatically in this release, and you should be good. If not, then just note that, and that's you'll have to go in and manually do your OAuth app credentials into the UI.
What's interesting, I have a Nest smoke alarm, smoke alarm. And
Yep.
I've never, it's been on my network
Same.
for ages. I've
Same.
never integrated it with Home Assistant. In fact, I bought it just like a month before Google announced that they were changing their APIs for Google
Yeah.
Nest. And I had two. I returned one. I kept this one. The other day, the Home Assistant detected it on my network and said, "Would you like to configure it?" I've never seen that
Cool.
before. I've just checked here. It hasn't come back. I don't know if it was a mistake for whatever reason.
Interesting.
But yeah, I don't know if there's been a change. It's now allowing me to, auto discover the Nest thermostat, not the Nest thermostat, the Nest smoke detector, and configure it. I know PJ, who's emailed us a couple of times this year, was pretty upset about this change. So I'm hoping that with this change and the workaround PJ had is still going to work for him.
Yeah, I've had these same like you, Phil. I have two Nest fire or smoke alarms, whatever
Smoke
you want to call
alarms,
that.
yeah.
And I've had those since before I started using Home Assistant either, right? So
Yep.
it's those are, I mean, they're just as much as I get annoyed with Nest, those things have just been kind of chugging along.
Yep.
And zero maintenance. I've had it in Home Assistant for quite a while, to the point where I don't actually remember how I brought it into Home Assistant. Was it a custom plugin? I don't think it was.
Interesting. Yeah, because that was the reason I wanted. Like, I wanted the ability, like when a fire is detected or smoke is detected, that automations kick off, right? But then, like with the Google changes that they did, I was like, oh, it's gonna be too much effort to bring it in, maintain it. I'll just use the app, right?
Yeah. Oh, I just looked and it's unavailable. Okay, maybe it just hasn't worked forever. I don't even know. It's one of those things where I don't really, because I still have the app installed. Just again, it gives me a lot of heads up and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That the like it tells me when there's a sound check that's about to be done, and so those devices, if you're not aware of it, they basically do like a little like chirp to test the sound once a month. But it'll give me a proactive like, hey, your sound check is about to happen. So that means if I'm on a call, but the problem is you can't schedule these sound checks, at least as far as I've seen.
Oh, interesting.
So if I'm on a call or something, I know, hey, you know what, ahead of time, just like a couple of seconds ahead of time, or maybe like 30 seconds ahead of time, I'll be like, okay, I need to mute in like 30 seconds. And then when you hear the bleep, bleep, I'll just quickly mute. And then, cause it'll do my upstairs one and then it'll do my downstairs one. And then you'll get a notification, hey, sound check is complete. So you're like, all right, I'm all clear. But I do like the fact that they have that, right? It's you don't.
Yeah,
like,
I think I've disabled that. I've never. I think I've seen it in the settings somewhere, but I don't think I've ever experienced a sound check happening. I know I can, ask it to do a sound check through the app, or I can, press the button to test.
Yeah.
But I don't think I've had it automatically happen.
That's interesting. Yeah, I don't know if I do get the. I don't know. I've just always had it. So I maybe like, again, that's not an app that I go into or do anything with, right? I just kind of
sort of like a set and forget thing, right? Like,
yeah,
it's been done.
It's there. I know this when I get the sound check notifications. I'm like, okay, it still works. Great, cool. Like,
yeah.
'Cause, I mean, even think traditional home alarm system, right? Like once every like 6 months or whatever, typically doing like time change. That's what they say, right? Is go test your alarm or whatever.
Yep, exactly.
That's the only time I ever think of like, oh, right, I have my smoke alarm, right? Which is so this way it's kind of nice. It reminds you once a month that, hey, this thing exists and it still works. But yeah.
All right. And also, as I mentioned before, the weather component. So all weather integrations providing weather entities. So previously, the units for weather had not been corresponding correctly with the documentation.
Mm-hmm.
These units are now aligned for pressure and wind speeds. So if the unit system is metric, the default pressure unit is HPA, whatever that is, and the default wind speed unit is kilometers per hour. And yeah, there's a similar one for Imperial. So yeah, just check your weather integration. Make sure, if you are using those sort of things to do automations, they may change in this release.
Nice. And last but not least, this is Zwave.js version bump.
Yeah, seems to be the go-to thing when we're doing a release this year.
Yeah,
they're pretty tied together at the moment.
Yep, makes sense. So, upgrade one, upgrade the other. So
I don't know, Rohan. We talked a few episodes ago now
mhm.
about the dark sky going dark, and we had a Cloud Strikes
Yeah.
Again segment on it. So the small, what happened there was Apple had purchased the dark sky to basically integrate their weather platform
Yeah.
into Home Assistant. So I think they announced originally it was and they gave you like 6 months grace period. That was like
Mhm.
years ago, maybe like 18 months ago. Since then, I think the deadline's just been pushed out, pushed out, pushed out. I got an email this month saying that Apple has announced WeatherKit, which is
Yeah.
going to be the new version of the Dark Sky. And so, as part of the acquisition of Dark Sky, that they're rolling out the new Weather API, which is called WeatherKit. And the API will be available via a REST API, which is good
Nice.
for Home Assistant. So Home Assistant would need a REST API to get this data from Apple. However, it does require an Apple developer's license,
Right.
which does cost a yearly subscription fee. There
Yeah.
is 500,000 calls per month are included with an Apple developer license, and then they have pricing as extra if you're making more than 500,000 API calls. It is designed for app developers to put weather inside their apps and then do that.
Yeah. So I wonder if that's something where like that, is that something that like Nabu Casa could handle where they would make that API call, whatever. But
Well,
at that point, there's all of these other providers, right? Why drive up the cost?
yeah, exactly, and that's what I was thinking too. And then I guess also where because like Nabucasa could be like in a good position to cache some of that data, right? Like if you've got 3 Home Assistant
True.
users in Toronto, right? Like you don't necessarily need to make 3 calls to get the same weather,
Yeah.
right? Like Nabucasa could act as a proxy to the WeatherKit API and just save an API call. But if the cynic in me says that Apple would have licensing that says you can't do that, but
Yeah, I would assume so, right?
mm,
But I mean, it is a developer toolkit though, so maybe not. I don't know.
yeah, exactly.
But there's a lot of, I mean, yeah, like I'd be interested to see what happens there, but might be kind of cool to have that back. I know, again, they've been doing quite a bit. Like again, they are releasing. I don't know if you saw on like iOS 16, they're releasing like iPad OS 16. They're releasing a new full screen weather app and like stuff like that,
Oh,
which they didn't
really?
have before, right? So
Yeah.
I'm guessing a lot of that is tied back to the Dark Sky acquisition.
Yep. Getting more data and richer data that they can use, right?
Yeah, but it's just weird that they acquired a company. They spent money on this and they kind of sat on it for not sat on. I'm sure they were doing stuff in the background, but just didn't release anything publicly for it, right? So I don't know. It's kind of interesting that's the case, but maybe there's a lot that happened in the back end where they had to rewrite a ton of stuff and rebuild a ton of stuff, and but yeah, that's entirely speculation because I know nothing about what Apple's doing. So,
Oh, you don't? Oh, okay. Fair
right?
enough.
Yeah. They don't. Tim Cook doesn't call me and say, "Hey, man, this is what we're doing this week."
I still not returning your calls.
Yeah. It's just, but it is what it is. But I think that is it. Yeah.
What's your hit list for this month in home automation? What are you going to try and
Honestly, my goal this month
accomplish?
is just sleep. I'm not doing a whole lot in this. There's just a ton of stuff I have to do outside of home automation. So this week's going to be a little bit of a lighter week or month, I guess, for home automation. But I don't know. We'll see. I've been trying to bring together just some like just refactor some of my like, hey, I'm goodbye automation or good night automation, stuff like that. But again, that's not really like I'm not building a ton of stuff around there or anything like that. So
How did you go with your Bluetooth lock? Did you get that sorted? I know you had some trouble with it, taking ages with, good night routine and pausing it. Were you able to resolve that
So
yet?
I got rid of the Kivo. As in I still have it, but like I pulled it out. Um, Unfortunately, the only possible locks that still fit without me having to um, drill a hole in my door, which again is typically not an issue, but the problem is just because the placement of the window in my door,
Yeah, that's right.
it would literally hit the window, and I don't really want to spend the money right now, at least for a new door. So unfortunately, the only brand I can mostly use are the Wiser ones, which in the US is called Quickset, in Canada it's called Wiser, but same brand.
Yep.
And they have so I actually opted for a touchpad lock just so that I don't have to deal with that. And it does have Bluetooth, it has Wi-Fi built in as well. But unfortunately, it's cloud connected, which I'm not a fan of.
Oh no.
I know. Just so none of the Zigbee or Z-Wave locks that are available, at least for me here in Canada, are would work with my door.
You should have the access to the American version though, right? Because the Z-Wave frequencies are all the same for North America.
Yeah. It's just the only problem is again, those are like again, some of these locks are a lot of money.
Yeah.
Like I thought I paid I think the lock I paid for or the lock that I ended up buying was, I want to say it was like $250 or something like that, which is still fairly expensive for a lock.
Yeah.
And some of these other ones that I'm seeing, especially if I got it like shipped in and things like that, are like 400 or 500. I know there was quite a few cool suggestions where, like from users on Twitter and stuff like that, where it's we could put in what is it like? It's essentially in the lock mechanism, so the actual bolt mechanism. So in there, that is smart. So you can just kind of use whatever lock behind it and use that. But the prices on those are still fairly steep. They're like 400 or 500 US.
Yeah, right.
So which is, I just didn't want to part with that much money right now for the lock. So just at least temporary stopgap. Maybe afterwards I'll get a nicer door or whatever when when we have the budget for it, essentially, and review a lot of that stuff at that point. But for now, I'm sticking with this. It's worst case. I mean, right now it is a hacks add-on that I have for it. It works. It's not. I'm not getting the like. It's really weird though. The lock reports as jammed a lot of the times, but it is properly locked and it's not jammed at all. Actually, like
It's strange because I have my Yale Z-Wave lock, and it reports in home. It's like there's a binary sensor, jammed, and I think since I've had the lock, it has reported jammed as true. Or on. So, and that's never cleared. I don't know how to unclear it. So I just ignore it, but I don't.
Yeah. Well,
So
right now, Home Assistant shows my lock as unlocked typically when it is jammed. So when I close it from inside, just with the latch, it shows locked. But when I hit the lock button outside on the touchpad, it jams.
Interesting.
But it's not jammed. Like I've had like my wife stand outside, hit the lock button, and like I'm turning it, and it's actually properly locked. And you try to pull it, whatever is properly locked. It's still like, so maybe it's just not. Maybe it's like 99% of the way, not 100%. I don't know. Maybe there's something weird there. But the Wiser app reports it as jammed. But and Home Assistant, because I think that integration doesn't have a jammed feature. I think it just has an unlock and a lock. So it doesn't report it as that. But at the same time, it is part of my goodnight routine. When I do say goodnight, it does lock it. So I'm fairly happy with that. I wish I could actually properly view it in Home Assistant. So at least when I'm traveling, I'm like, it doesn't show unlock. So right now I still have to crossfire the other app.
Yeah.
I think what I've realized is I hate locks. It's just a pain.
Have you got a sensor on the door, like to tell if the door is open or closed?
I do. Yeah. It's on the door, so I can actually tell if the door is opened. Which is, again, the one time actually how I found out that my Wiser lock, when I walked away, my previous one, the Kivo, when I tapped, because you have to tap on it and whatever. I thought I heard the sound, but I didn't actually hear the sound. The thing is, in my head, you're like, okay, tap, give it a second. You hear the whirring of the motor to lock it, whatever. And luckily, we were only 5-10 minutes away, and we opened the door. Or sorry, we were I don't know, I was getting a belt or something like that, or a hat or something. And all of a sudden, I just see, and it was like middle of winter. I just see hey, front door is open and it's been open for like a minute or whatever, and my HVAC is turned off. And I was like, oh crap. So we rushed back home, and I saw, and lo and behold, my door was open. So it just hadn't caught the lock properly. And that's when I realized my door latch was actually, not the latch, the door handle had an issue too. And I was like, all right, just get rid of it. And
were you able to find the lock with a tumbler? Like, you needed a key on your door, right? This replacement got a key as well?
So it's got a key as well as a keypad.
Yep.
So we actually primarily use the keypad, and I actually find that the keypad right now is actually way faster than the Kivo was even before, even though I have to manually type in my code.
Yep.
And so I'm, I don't know, like 100 times happier. And again, at least I'm not locked out. I'm not whatever. There's no fear of it being like, or I'm not sitting there holding my groceries or whatever it might be that's heavy, sitting there being like, or standing there being like, okay, come on, open, like my hands are hurting, right? And
yeah.
So, but yeah, it's so at least for now, that one's resolved, temporarily, at least until I can get one that actually works with my bore size for the door. So yeah,
we'll throw a link up to the lock that Rohan's talking about as well, in case you're interested in, how Rohan solved his solution and what he's gone for. So
yeah,
we'll throw up a link in the show notes as well.
Yeah, perfect. Cool. I think that's an episode.
That's it. Great. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next release.
All right. Cheers. Take it easy. Cheers.
If you want to share your Home Assistant journey or come on as a guest, reach out to us at feedback@hasspodcast.io. That's HASS podcast.io.
The Home Assistant Podcast is hosted by Phil Hawthorne and myself, Rohan Karamandi. For links to topics we discussed today, check out our show notes on hasspodcast.io.